sermon this morning begins with a correction. Last Sunday, I had a chronological error in my retelling of the gospel story. Now, understandably, I was absolutely intoxicated by the smell of lilies like these behind me, the presence of actual human beings at worship. I was likely also a bit exhausted from all the in-person worship opportunities throughout Holy Week and Easter. Definitely, I was wired on coffee and excited about the sunshine and the spring daffodils. And in all of that, I lost focus and I made a blatant error in the scriptural chronology. I said last week that the disciples didn't get to see Jesus in his resurrected form for a week. It's not true. They saw him later that night. Later that same day of the resurrection, Jesus appeared to them and said, "Peace be with you." So as I drove home from the Easter services, singing the hymns and just thanking God that our choir was back together and in person, it hit me that I had gotten the chronology incorrect, that I'd gotten it wrong. While not exactly heretical, the timeline was incorrect. Did you notice? Some of you must have noticed this mistake. So this gospel today lays it all out. I don't think I can get it wrong because we just read it in John's gospel, so allow me to try again. The tomb where the body of Jesus, the crucified body of Jesus, is laid is found to be empty first by Mary Magdalene on Easter Sunday morning. She runs back to the house where a bunch of them are staying. Simon Peter and the beloved disciple hear what happened and they go running to the tomb. They see that the body is gone. They go back to the house. Mary Magdalene stays in the garden around the tomb weeping. And in her grief and distress, that's when she meets for the first time the resurrected Lord. She thinks he's a gardener until he says her name. She goes back and tells everyone, and they definitely do not believe her. They feel all those feelings, and then later that same day in the evening, with the doors locked for fear, Jesus enters into the room and says, "Peace be with you." They didn't wait a week. I got that wrong last week. Jesus shows those disciples on that very first Sunday of the resurrection, that night, he shows them his hands and his side, and that's when they get it. That's when they get it. They believe that this man standing among them is Jesus, who is now fully alive after being fully dead. They believe, perhaps, I think, that Jesus is God. They believe in the resurrection, and they start to really get it about the divinity of Jesus. Then, truly, a whole week later, Jesus appears and does this again, presumably for the benefit of Thomas, who wasn't there on that first Sunday night. Like the others, Thomas doesn't believe the eyewitness account. They didn't believe Mary Magdalene until they saw Jesus. Thomas doesn't believe them until he sees and touches Jesus. Jesus shows up and tells Thomas right away, "Touch me here where they hung me from the cross." And Thomas believes. Dead Jesus is alive and now standing before him. Jesus is God. I have so many questions about this moment. Most especially, why would God choose to come back wearing the wounds? We know that God created all of creation and could come back from the dead. Why not come back without the wounds? Why wear those wounds? Alongside the miracle of the resurrection, these wounds remain visible, physically present. God died on a cross from the violence of humanity willingly, made that choice. And then God decidedly kept wearing the wounds, made that choice. I wonder why. I wonder if God kept the wounds to prove Jesus' identity, Are the wounds still there for credibility's sake? I wonder if God kept the wounds so that God could look like us, like human beings, matching us in our wounded places. Are the wounds kept on the body of Jesus to create a connection with humanity, to create a connection with you and with me? Belief in God does not guarantee an easy life without tragedy or struggle. Belief in God does guarantee access, constant access to the presence of God. In the midst of tragedy and struggle and hardship and pain, we find that God is reaching out and touching our wounded places, believing that we are holy. We are worthy of God's love despite the wounds and the scars that we wear. I wonder if God wears these wounds into resurrected life as a way of witnessing to what it is like to be a human being, wounded, yet with this great capacity for life-giving love and joy all at the same time. Perhaps by leaving the wounds present and unhealed, God is being with us in the areas of our lives where the pain is just too big to stay hidden, where the betrayals and the tragedies and the frailties peek out from behind the veneer of holding it all together all the time. God came back to life in the resurrection and decidedly left the wounds right there for the disciples to see, for Thomas to touch. So also our struggles do not hold us back from the joy and love of the resurrection miracle. As young people grow up, and I'm especially mindful this morning of little Heidi Bell. She's about a year old. She just turned a year old. We wanted to baptize her in the fall, but because of COVID, we could not do that. The bird just flew into the parish hall, and I have a witness, right? You don't have to believe me. You can take Nikki's word for it. That's how witnessing goes. So if you saw me there darting around, it's because we had a friend in the building. Back to the sermon. As young Heidi Bell grows up, this 1-year-old that will be baptized today into the faith as a believer in this resurrection miracle, we want to be mindful as a community of believers that young people benefit and grow more resilient when we share our struggles appropriately with them. When young people have an opportunity to witness that life has hard stuff in it, and that we are seeking God's wisdom to face those difficult moments. We, as adults, rely on elders and mentors for guidance. Then young people can know what to do when presented with roadblocks and hurdles in their lives. These are the ways that we teach one another how to make meaning and stay present with God in the midst of hardship. When we are willing to toss aside the shame of being born in these mortal human bodies, we are these mortal human creatures who hurt and get hurt. When we're willing to toss aside the shame of all that and openly share the lessons of our lives, even to the point of exposing our wounds, we become more credible, more believable to one another. People can see God in us. When we talk to young people about our real experiences, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it is critical that we go beyond descriptions of the pain to exploration of how we moved through it, the decisions that we made, the choices that we made, the choices we would make if we got to do it all over again. It's critical that we share the wisdom, the understandings that have been gleaned, that we share that knowledge and wisdom with one another, especially with younger generations. Faithful believers are capable of being wounded and of wounding one another. That's why forgiveness is such a key practice for the followers of Jesus. Faithfulness means doing our best at any given moment and forgiving ourselves when we mess it up, forgiving one another. Some of the most painful moments of my life have been transformed by the grace of God into wisdom and strength, into a greater capacity for love. I wouldn't be who I am without those moments, without the pain. I sometimes struggle to move toward trust in God in the face of pain, when it would just simply be more satisfying, at least in the short term, to become bitter and let the anger fester. It's more fun to stand in front of people and be correct and look like you've got it all together than it is to stand in front of people and say, I got it wrong, I messed up. And yet, when we allow ourselves to be fully human and vulnerable with one another, that's when we build trust in one another and in God. When you know that I've messed up, or when you know that I've spent some pretty long, dark nights blaming myself for a friend who died as a result of the disease of alcoholism, when you know that I have been victimized by trauma, then you can believe that I will not run away from you when you share your pain with me. When you hold out your hands and you point to your side and you say, see the ones I'm carrying? When I know that you have experienced tragedy, then I trust you and your ability to stick around when I'm struggling. I believe that God has power over death. I believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead. I believe that Jesus is God, and I believe that God wore those wounds to win us to believe, to win our trust in God's ability to stay present in the midst of pain and violence in our lives. We are taught by our families, perhaps by society, to hide our wounds. Yet, isn't the wisdom of our text today telling us to lift up our wounded places to God, to ask God to touch us where we are wounded, to witness the wounds, to be with us and see the places where we have known pain, to ask God to shape the pain into life-giving lessons, into wisdom, to resurrect that part of us from death into life. This is our work as God believers, as apostles of the one who could not be killed and hidden away in a tomb. Our work is to receive the breath of God and breathe that resurrection love into the world around us, touching wounded places, witnessing God's grace in the midst of violence, seeing what is painful, and sticking around anyway, believing anyway, praying for God's resurrected wisdom to show us the way to life.